The single most important event on the NBA calendar is the draft lottery, where the worst teams in the league are rewarded with superstars, which isn't always a good thing. There is a long list of top-level prospects that couldn't overcome the bad circumstances of the team that drafted them, and with arguably the greatest NBA draft prospect of all time coming to the league this year, anything other than an ideal landing spot for Victor Wembanyama would be an absolute disaster for the league. So why leave that up to chance? And this has happened before. Can't miss prospects suspiciously ending up on teams that are great for the player and the league, and it might be happening again this year. The history of rigging the NBA draft lottery famously goes back to the very first lottery in 1985. The prize that year was the surefire #1 pick Patrick Ewing, who would immediately become one of the most dominant defensive forces in basketball. But the lottery was much different back then, even though the reasons for it being implemented are very familiar to the modern fan: tanking. Prior to the addition of the lottery in 1985, it became increasingly common for teams to tank their way to the bottom and, as then San Diego Clippers owner Donald Sterling said, win by losing. So the league stepped in and added the lottery, which at the time gave all 7 non-playoff teams an equal 14.3% chance of landing the first pick in Patrick Ewing. And the winner that year, of course, was the New York Knicks, the most famous franchise in a league that was also coming off of one of its worst seasons in years. They were suddenly gifted the player that would carry them to much more success than that team would have normally been destined for. And even before the lottery took place, there was plenty of buzz that it had already been decided for Ewing to end up on the Knicks. A great market for such a great player to go to for the league, a team that didn't intentionally tank but just had some bad luck the prior season, and a team that immediately after winning the lottery was swarmed with new season ticket requests. The most high-profile franchise getting the best prospect in the league's newest TV spectacle. It all seemed a bit odd how perfectly it came together. And the actual logistics of that first lottery give some credence to the idea that it was rigged in the Knicks' favor as well. The whole thing was kind of jumbled together with these giant envelopes that Stern struggled to open at times, and the envelope itself was certainly a weird choice in the first place, and many theories have been tossed around as to how exactly the league would have guaranteed the Knicks to get the first pick. And quite honestly, it would not have been difficult at all, especially for a commissioner in Stern that was known for his fair share of behind-the-scenes maneuvering. But despite this being the first lottery ever, it was not the most consequential. That belongs to the 2003 NBA Draft Lottery, the one that most closely resembles the craziness of the 2023 lottery now 20 years later. LeBron James, of course, was the prize that year, and everybody knew it. He was the most coveted NBA draft prospect of all time, and as we all now know, whatever team ended up with him would have likely guaranteed themselves at least one title. The biggest storyline by far at the time was the possibility of the Cleveland Cavaliers, LeBron's hometown team, landing themselves the first pick. And on the surface, it might not seem like the NBA had that much of a reason to rig the lottery in their favor. After all, I just talked about the benefit of someone like Ewing going to a big market like New York over teams like Indiana, so that same logic should apply here. Right? Well, not really. There really weren't any obvious big market teams at the top of the lottery at the time, and even a team like the Clippers, who were in LA, certainly didn't deserve LeBron. Plus, the bigger market versus smaller market gap was closing a bit in terms of visibility as the league continued to grab more and more of the average sports fan's attention. And a much more compelling narrative would be not only the fact that LeBron would get to stay home in Cleveland, but also the impact that that would have on the franchise. LeBron basically turned the Cavs into a big market team while he was there, and the increase in the value of the franchise directly as a result of them winning the 2003 draft lottery would be a stroke of genius by Stern if he really did decide to rig it in the Cavs' favor. Given the options at the time to send LeBron to these sometimes exciting but still pretty unknown Raptors, or the Nuggets, who are one of the worst franchises in the league, or the Heat, who hadn't yet earned their modern reputation as a great franchise, or the hometown storyline of LeBron in Cleveland, the right choice was pretty obvious here. And again, if there was ever a draft lottery to rig in the league's favor, it was this one. And that might be happening once again, which brings us to the 2023 NBA Draft Lottery with arguably the best prospect since LeBron and potentially ever, Victor Wembanyama. And with a player as important as he is to the future of the league, you have to wonder if those conspiracy theories about the lottery being rigged might come up once again. Keep in mind, not only is the success of Wembanyama really important to his own team, but the league as a whole. The international audience and attention that he brings with him is unlike any prospect we've seen in years, and if he hits the way that everybody thinks that he will, that is massive. And you'd ideally like to have him end up in the best place possible for him to succeed. A team like the Thunder would make sense given their track record of drafting and developing big-time talent, and they're a team that is one of the most proven non-playoff teams in the lottery, but their chances are really small. Having a team like Dallas end up with him and pairing him with Luka would not only be insane, but would also completely save a situation in Dallas that got really weird and might continue to without some big changes this offseason, although they intentionally tanked their way there, which wouldn't be a great look for the league if they rigged it in their favor, and again, it's not super realistic. There's also the Spurs, who despite recent struggles are still seen as one of the better organizations in the league and are one of the most stable environments for Wembanyama to go to amongst teams at the top of the lottery. And then looking at the other teams, despite a ton of talent, there really isn't much here in terms of long-term stability. So what if the league looks at this and thinks that they need to make something happen? They need to shift some things around. Make sure the Thunder or Pelicans or Mavs or Spurs end up with this generational prospects instead of the Pacers, Wizards, Pistons, or Rockets. If you want to maximize his success, it is easy to argue that that is the right move, and the history of the league does tell us it's possible. So let's make it happen. What's the ideal version of events on lottery night for the NBA? The third pick would go to the Houston Rockets, who would select Alabama's Brandon Miller. Arguably the highest upside prospect in the draft outside of Wembanyama, Miller gives the Rockets the kind of wing presence that their roster desperately needs. This might seem questionable at first, but new coach Ime Udoka is really the driving force behind this decision. His experience molding some younger players, especially high upside wings, from his 1 year in Boston is invaluable here. His no-nonsense approach on the court makes him the perfect coach for a team in Houston that is extremely talented, but also lacks discipline, and Miller fits right into that mold. If he hits, the Rockets suddenly start to look like a real basketball team with a ton of interesting pieces, without risking putting Wembanyama there, given the turmoil of the last few years. The second pick would go to the San Antonio Spurs, who would select Scoot Henderson in what, in my opinion, is a perfect match. The Spurs are known for helping players improve as shooters in the NBA, and that is the biggest hole in Henderson's game. He's an incredible athlete and high-level competitor, but learning the ins and outs of the point guard position for one of the best organizations in the league is the best way to ensure his success in the NBA. This also gives the Spurs a perimeter creator that is lacking on a roster that has some of it, but more interestingly has a lot of pieces that work really well together around the high-level creator that Henderson will hopefully become in San Antonio. Which brings me to the first overall pick, which shockingly ends up in Oklahoma City. Although it might not seem like it at first, this is by far the most exciting outcome for the Victor Wembanyama story. A core of SGA, Josh Giddey, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, and Victor Wembanyama would be the most talented young core in the league, and maybe ever. The amount of positional flexibility on both ends of the court is insane just to think about, and seeing it on the court would be mind-blowing. But that isn't even what makes this so great. The OKC rebuild has been put together for this exact moment. And they have a good amount of other role players and of course tons of future draft picks to continue to build around Wembanyama in the best way possible. And honestly, the only reason to think that this isn't the right decision is because it might just be too unfair for the rest of the league. And although there are a ton of interesting options, I think that would be the ideal lottery outcome for the NBA. Two of which are pretty likely in the Spurs and Rockets, and the other is just a 1.7% chance for the Thunder. But we've seen this before. Whenever the NBA really needs a particular outcome, it always seems to happen. Ewing in 85, LeBron in 03, the Cavs winning 3 more lotteries after LeBron left on their path to getting him back in Cleveland free agency in 2014. Generational prospects bring with them unprecedented circumstances, on accident or on purpose.